All right, guys, we are back in my garage for another video, and I'm really excited to share with you guys that we are upgrading my low pressure fuel pump to a completely plug and play system. This fuel pump doesn't require a motive reflex, it doesn't require a boost trigger or anything like that. It's going to install just like the stock low pressure fuel pump, but flow more fuel. So this fuel pump comes from Arcade Tunes, and we're going to go ahead and install that on my 340i. But first, I'm going to give you a little bit of a comparison to the fuel pump that I was running already and explain why I'm switching to this fuel pump to give you a little bit more information in case this is the route you guys might want to go down. So let's go ahead and talk about it.
Now, as always, for everybody that's new to the channel, I create these videos to help keep you updated on the latest developments in our community, as well as discuss technical topics so that we have a better understanding of how our engines work. So if you're interested in more videos like that, be sure to subscribe because there will be a lot more coming out in the future.
All right, so let's go ahead and pull up the old fuel pump at risk of getting fuel all over myself. So this is the fuel pump that we have been running, and this is a fuel pump made by Fuel It, and you might not know it's Fuel It, but it's pretty much a standard design fuel pump upgrade for our cars. You have the stock fuel pump with the stock hat, stock regulator, filter, and all that stuff with the secondary pump added onto the side. So in my case, I got it with a Walbro 450, but you can also get it with a 525. Now, the big benefit here is it flows a lot of fuel. The stock fuel pump can support upwards of 650 to 700 horsepower on an ethanol mix. And then this additional pump, whether you get a 450 or a 525, can support a lot more. This design should be very capable of supporting over 1,000 horsepower. However, the issue that I ran into is because if you were looking into the front of my car, this is the direction and kind of like the situation where it would sit inside of the fuel tank. So as you can imagine, there's fuel kind of all around the fuel pump in most scenarios. But as the fuel level drops, I ran into an issue called fuel starvation. And I posted a video about this recently. I'll have that linked in the video description. But basically, on a fast or long right-hand turn, like a big right-hand sweeper, all the fuel flows to the left side of the tank. Now, generally, that's not a big deal because with the stock basket, this actually keeps fuel around the fuel pump that's inside of here. So you don't really have issues with fuel starvation in the stock setup. However, with the secondary pump outside of the tank, it's very easy to run into a situation where this doesn't have fuel around the fuel pump, and so it can starve of fuel. And if this ever tries to activate while you're on the track, that can cause issues where it basically sucks up air, which causes fuel starvation, which could potentially lean out your engine. So thankfully, the worst issue I had was some misfires and drivetrain malfunctions. But in a worst case scenario, this is definitely something that could damage your engine if you don't take the appropriate precautions for your driving style. Now, your first thought might be, why don't you move the secondary fuel pump to the other side of the fuel pump? And the issue with that is because over here, one, you've got your fuel level reader. So this actually floats on top of the fuel level. And as it goes up and down, the car is able to tell how much fuel is in the tank. So you don't want anything in the way of this because it won't be accurate. The other thing is this little port down here at the bottom. This is the transfer coming from the left side of your fuel tank. Your fuel tank is kind of split in half. It has a big hump in the middle that separates the two sides. So there is an additional fuel line that goes over the hump and into the left side of your fuel tank. While your fuel pump is running, it is actively pulling fuel from the left side of your tank over to the right side directly into the basket. So it works really well because, again, it's making sure fuel is always around your fuel pump. It sucks fuel directly into the fuel pump, but it also makes sure that you pull fuel from the left side of the tank before you empty the right side of the tank. So it gives you the best opportunity to make sure you have as much fuel as possible around this fuel pump. Now, again, the issue is if you're going around a big right-hand turn, a lot of the fuel can slosh over to the left, maybe even go over that hump and go over into the left side of the tank, which again can lead to the fuel starvation issues because you'll have less fuel around the fuel pump on the right side. So this is where the issue arises. The stock setup is very good because it keeps fuel around the fuel pump and pulls fuel directly into the basket. But once you start adding a secondary pump, there are just additional things that you need to consider. Now, there are a lot of different things that I could do to address this. One is I could just disable this fuel pump, which just because I was in a rush in the middle of the track day, just trying to get more laps, I didn't really consider that. But if I pulled the fuse for this, disabled the relay, or disabled it in my reflex, then I wouldn't have to worry about this turning on. Another option is to run a bigger filter on the bottom. So this filter that you see is basically sucking up and holding fuel to help keep fuel around the fuel pump. There are bigger ones that hold more fuel, they soak up more fuel, so it helps avoid fuel starvation in a lot of scenarios. But the fix I'm going with, as you can tell by the intro and the video title, is the RK Tunes plug and play low pressure fuel pump. So the way that this one works, as you can tell, is it's pretty straightforward. It looks just like the stock low pressure fuel pump. The only difference is the pump inside of the basket flows more than the stock low pressure fuel pump. So the basket design and everything is the same. It'll use the same filter, regulator, all of that good stuff, completely plug and play, and will work with the factory EKP. However, it's going to flow more fuel. So when you need that extra demand, especially if you're pushing higher horsepower levels or running ethanol, this will help support higher horsepower levels without running out of fuel. I think in my last video, I said that this can support around 700 wheel horsepower on E85, which is plenty for my setup, but they've actually tested this up to 800 wheel horsepower on E85, so it definitely can support more than what I'm shooting for. I want to stay in the 600 to 650 range just to keep the engine and transmission and everything happy, but this definitely could be more than enough if you want to upgrade your transmission and push like a bigger turbo setup. This could help you run higher horsepower levels as well. It won't support quite as much power as the additional fuel pump setups that have the auxiliary pump on the outside of the basket, but you know, it really just depends on your goals. For me, this is a perfect solution, kind of something that I always wished was available, because now it's plug and play. I don't need a reflex or a boost trigger or anything to make this turn on. It'll run just like stock and flow exactly how much fuel I need. Now, the risk here is when you run a fuel pump that flows too much, it can burn up the EKP because the power draw from the fuel pump can overwhelm the stock fuel controller. Now, again, this setup doesn't flow as much as some of the other plug and play kits that are out there on the market that some people have heard of burning up the EKP. So that helps reduce the risk of actually damaging your fuel controller while still flowing more fuel than the stock fuel pump. So it's kind of a middle ground, again, for people with more simple setups that just want to make a little more power on E85 without shooting for 1,000 plus horsepower. Now, there are a lot of other little things that set this apart. You know, all the fuel lines are designed to run E85. They're the higher quality hoses that avoid bursting even when they're submerged in fuel. So this is an entire thought out setup by RK Tunes to make sure that you have a nice, safe, and reliable fuel pump setup. Again, it's completely plug and play, so you don't have to rely on any other triggers or issues like some of the things I ran into with my Motive Reflex. It just makes it a lot more foolproof. And the biggest benefit, of course, is that everything is inside the basket, and that's my main concern. I want to be able to support the higher horsepower levels that I run when I'm running E85, but when I'm running on the track, on pump gas, even on lower boost maps, I want to make sure I avoid those fuel starvation issues. So this will make a complete setup that I can run daily as well as on the track without running into any issues. So I think we have a little bit of assembly required. We're going to attach the actual fuel level sensor right here on the side. He took this off just for shipping purposes to make sure it doesn't get damaged, because you definitely don't want to get bent. Otherwise, you'll have issues with your fuel level reading. So we'll insert that in here, and then we'll go ahead and get that installed on the 340i. All right, so this is going to be super simple and straightforward. Again, we're just going to basically install this exactly like a stock low pressure fuel pump. So the first thing is make sure you replace this gasket, especially if you've removed your fuel pump a couple times. I'll have a part number in the video description so that you can get a replacement one. And then we've got our transfer line in here. So this will get plugged in to the low pressure fuel pump. Make sure it's not in the way of anything. And it just clips into the top hat. There will be like an open port on one side. So snap that in. There we go. And then for the actual transfer line, you put it in at like a 90-degree angle. like this, and then it rotates into place once it's fully seated. So we'll push this in. There we go. And then it rotates up and snaps into place. Actually, we'll rotate this down for now so we can feed the fuel pump in here a little bit easier. And just kind of be careful with all the fuel lines and everything that you have. And make sure you don't damage the fuel level float. Get it all in there. And there we go. Much, much easier. And don't forget to flip up that fuel line so it locks in place. There we go. And again, make sure your gasket is flat and even all the way around. Push your fuel pump top hat down. And then you've got your locking ring. So slide that underneath the fuel line. And then we'll lock this into place and snap your fuel line down. Oh, and please don't forget to plug this back in. For some reason, I always forget to do that. Plug it back in. Otherwise, you'll drive 5 miles down the road and run out of gas. Ask me how I know. All right, guys, so fast forward a little bit. I've realized I forgot to film an outro for this video. So at this point, I've actually been testing it for a little while, and I definitely can confirm we've been testing it on ethanol mixes as well as just regular pump E85, and it works great. It's holding pressure at much higher boost levels than the stock pump would be able to handle. And so I definitely feel like this is a game changer. This is exactly what I wished was available when I first started upgrading my fuel system, but everything else I had seen was kind of hit or miss, and people were complaining about burnt out EKPs and things like that. So I'm really excited to see that not only is my fuel controller working fine, but it is definitely supporting the power levels that it's supposed to. So more coming soon. I'll be posting dyno numbers and all of that once we finish up testing my upgraded fuel system now that I've switched to DI only. But for now, that's it for this video. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.